Good evening. Welcome to Fogler's event, Artificial Intelligence in Business, Disruption or Opportunity, hosted by the University of Maine and its Maine Business Science and Technology Library Committee, of which I'm the chair. Artificial intelligence is transforming how businesses operate and how they compete and how they innovate. With rapid change comes a lot of questions. Will AI replace jobs? Will it create jobs? How can companies harness it? What skills will leaders need to thrive? Well, luckily, we have three panelists who are going to tackle those questions and whatever other ones that people might want to ask, either on Zoom or in person, from different perspectives. After the panelists introduce themselves, we'll dive into the discussion, leaving plenty of time for your questions. But before the panelists introduce themselves, I'll thank our organizers and our audience for joining the conversation. For those of you in the audience with us in person or on Zoom, feel free to ask questions and share opinions. Engagement really helps and can help open up new avenues of discussion. But let's meet our panelists, not to be simplistic, but we'll just go left to right. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Jason.
Hi, my name is Jason Harkins, and I am the Executive Dean of the Maine Business School and an Associate Professor of Entrepreneurship.
I'm Berkeley Almenhunter. I'm the Technical Director for Partner Programs at the Rue Institute. And what that means is that I work with companies to understand their analytics and AI maturity and design learning programs for them. And I design and teach a lot of classes about analytics and AI. Yeah, background in data science, so coming from the technical side of it.
I'm Dan Reed. I'm the Marketing and Program Manager at SCORE Maine. Among the things that I do with SCORE is I put together our educational webinars and workshops for small business owners, anywhere from 8 to 10 of them a month. And one of the workshops that I produce is how to use AI in your small business.
Well, great. Thank you all for coming. And just kick things off with, I think, a very basic question. If you're addressing a small or medium-sized business owner who's been hearing about AI all over the news, what are the first steps they should take to decide if AI is even right for them? If they're wondering not yet how to use AI, but whether or not they should even start. Throw it open. Whoever wants to respond. Yeah, Berkeley.
Sure. So I would say, instead of just saying, I need to use AI and trying to think of a specific AI thing you should use, I would start with, what does my business care about? What are our differentiators? What is our strategic plan? And what are our goals? And what are our roadblocks? And go from there to understand what kind of AI tools you can use. I think if you think of like every AI tool in the universe, you might get overwhelmed. So like one example is, if your differentiator is customer service, if you're the business that's known for customer service, you might not want to implement like a customer service chatbot, right? Because I've yet to experience one that's as good as talking to a human. I don't know about everybody else. Whereas if your differentiator is that you're the cheapest option, then maybe that sort of thing works for you. So I think you should always start with your strategic priorities as a first place to go.
Yeah, I think that that's great advice, and certainly reflects a lot of what we're talking to every business that we interact with about. I think the question of should I use AI is creating a sense that there's a dichotomy, that there's a world in which you should in no circumstance use AI. I mean, I can't imagine any business that wouldn't benefit from at least exploring ways in which to plug it in. I think understanding the strategic priorities of the business, certainly the place to start. The chatbots are still decidedly robotic, but the idea that even if you were that business that differentiates on customer service, maybe you're not using a chatbot to respond, but maybe you're using AI to sort inbound requests for service, or you're using it in a variety of other ways that can speed up your responsiveness and make you better prepared to engage with those customers. So I think that there's probably a way for almost every business at this point to use AI. It shouldn't be the only thing you do, and you shouldn't try and drive most of your business through it. But I would say in almost no cases is it that I would suggest just don't use any AI anywhere.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I would go so far as to say most businesses already use AI. You may not realize it, but when you take a picture of your receipt and category, or, store that away for later, and that information that it categorizes to QuickBooks or your accounting software is AI. So I would say, maybe broaden your understanding of what AI might look like and, think about those areas where you already have a program or an app that's already doing something for you and if AI might be involved. And if maybe that's the area you want to grow a little bit in, dipping your toes further into AI.
I think it does seem like when people think of AI, that when businesses think of AI, they're thinking about things that are, I think I'm using the right term, front facing, where you're thinking about chatbots. You're thinking about
Yeah.
what the consumer is using, but not thinking about things behind the scenes. I think maybe there's some more opportunities for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I think right now everybody's thinking about generative AI because that's
Right.
like the hot hypey thing in the news. But I mean, when people joke that I'm going to have like analytics is important and engraved on my gravestone. But people always come for the Gen AI, but then the more you talk to them, the more they realize that there's like a lot of fundamental analytics things they're missing. And there are different kinds of machine learning that can be useful. So I think like broadening what you're thinking about from just like a Gen AI chatbot is really useful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when a lot of people say AI, they really mean large language models. They don't necessarily mean artificial intelligence generally or machine learning, as we used to call it. So when it comes to artificial intelligence, as far as large language models, I do think the kind of starting behind the scenes, trying something that's not necessarily customer facing. I completely agree. I've never talked to a chatbot and thought, wow, I had a great experience.
Yeah.
I've had better experiences now that they've gotten better, but there's still a huge gap between that and the human experience.
Yeah, and like an example of that is we have a customer, there's several customers and lots of companies doing this, but we have a customer we're working with that's creating a large language model powered chatbot that their customer service team is using behind the scenes, which is sort of what you were talking about, to search their internal documentation so that that human that someone is talking to can get an answer faster.
Wait, jump down to a question I thought would come. I'm sorry. Jump down to a question I thought would come later, but this opens up a question that, are there any industries that are more or less less likely to use AI successfully? Are there some industries where AI would not be a help? It certainly seems like what you just said, that any business might benefit from integrating AI or machine learning behind the scenes. Is there any industry that's more or less likely?
I think if you could be considered a white glove service in your industry, you probably don't want to broadly adopt AI right now. That personal touch is why customers are coming to you, so you want to probably maintain that for the moment. There might be some areas where it makes sense, but I mean, I do small business consulting for marketing and strategy development, and if I came to a customer with something that looks obviously written with AI, they're probably not going to be very happy about that.
Yeah, although we have a large partner that we're working with that we're doing a big learning program with, and they're doing a bunch of AI projects with us, and they're definitely known for their customer service. So they're not going to touch that. I mean, one of the things they are doing is thinking about using Gen AI behind the scenes, but a lot of the other AI and analytics things that they're thinking about are just like understanding their customer data better, building models to predict like which products their customers might want to use or what kind of advice they could give them. And then there are things you can do. I think, some of the things that Gen AI is the best at, that anyone can use is like writing quick things. Now, there is definitely a style of writing. If you're lazy about it and you have Gen AI write stuff for you, people can tell if you don't edit it. But it's great for writer's block and it's great for getting you going. And as long as you go in with the expertise that you have and edit it, later it can speed you up in that way.
I've been the whole time they've been talking, I've been trying to think if there's an industry where you wouldn't use this. I mean, I mean, I could probably contrive of a specific company where it would be unlikely, but I don't think that there's an industry. Again, you're going to find places where you can plug this in, where it can add enormous value, and we're seeing it in every type of business that we work with. And I think the more you're interfacing, the more people have to do roughly the same work, the more effective Gen AI or AI tools can be to standardize processes and speed up insight gathering in other spaces. So larger organizations, while the adoption can be particularly complex, those are spaces where you can see those tools become particularly adept and capable in terms of keeping everybody having access to the same knowledge base, access to the same sets of policies, procedures, and approaches, which start to define what an organization is. But so again, I could probably come up with a company, but certainly not an industry where you'd say like, okay, there's an industry here where there's just nobody that could use it.
I want to remind those of you in attendance here and watching on Zoom, we're always open for you to ask questions. Any questions about on Zoom, by the way, so far, Heather? Nothing on Zoom? Oh, yes, that's a good point. If you're watching on Zoom, put the questions in the chat, not in the Q&A for this. Anybody here have questions? My colleague Christopher, more than happy to walk over with a microphone so you can express yourself. Nothing yet? Okay. Well, now that I don't know about you, but I'm a little surprised that the overwhelming opinion is that any business can benefit from using AI in some function. That begs the question, if you're addressing a small or medium business size owner, how to choose what AI they should choose. There's a lot of different AI tools out there. Should they even try to construct their own? There's a lot of services where you could construct your own AI, or how to select a service that they're going to use. Any advice on that? Let's start with Dan.
Yeah, I would, for the average small business, I would recommend just being very cautious and really taking a look at the terms of service for any AI platform that you decide to use. This was definitely more of an issue about a year ago, or a little more than that. But there was a period in time where almost every new AI business that was cropping up had in their terms of service that business owned explicitly the outputs of that AI, which means if you go and post it on Facebook, you're violating their terms of service, you're violating their copyright. I haven't seen as much of that in the last year, but it is something to be worried about and concerned about. On top of that, I think for a lot of small businesses, it can also be very easy to fall into the rabbit hole of trying to find a solution for a problem where the problem isn't as big as finding the solution is. You don't want to spend more time trying to fix a problem by engineering your prompt in just the right way for ChatGPT that you've actually lost time over just doing it manually in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I said it a little bit earlier, but I think, thinking about what your goals are as a business is always a good place to start. I think every, software tool that you're using now, or most of them, are going to start offering you some kind of an AI plugin. Some of them may be offered, some of them may not be offered. They may just happen. But getting into security and stuff too, I mean, you need to think about the fact that any of those tools, I mean, now if you're putting your data into anything, then they have your data, but any of those tools using AI, they can see whatever data you're using, depending on whether you're using like an enterprise version or a free version or the terms of service of that. They may be training their models on it, they may not. And that gets really tricky if you start thinking about like customer private information. I think if you're not somebody with a big data background, you're not necessarily thinking about that, but you need to be really careful about posting anyone's personal information or any of your, IP that is really important to your business into these tools, unless you know for sure that you have a contract where they're not going to train the model on it and that data is safe.
I would say so many of these tools have become so cheap that that if you're convinced that there's a place for utilizing one of the tools, there's probably a place for two or three. I've sat through a number of talks with world leading experts on AI at this point who will use this AI to test this, they're really, you're back testing, you're saying, okay, I want to write this prompt. I know ChatGPT is going to do a good job giving me an answer, but I'll use Gemini to help me construct the prompt so I get the answer that I want. I mean, they're all so inexpensive, relatively speaking, that if you're convinced that you're going to use AI in a space, you might look at, 2 or 3 different options in that space, because when you're talking about $20 a month, if you can commit to 20, you can probably commit to 4, there's just a reality there. I think that the AI agents, where they are being curated for specific industries, can be really powerful. So that moves from a generative AI platform to something that's got a specific agentic purpose for a role. Those can be really useful. Those are where you start to get more nuanced, and I think you start to see a lot more differentiation because they're specialized for specific tasks. And assessing that, I would say that this is just a good place to call out accessing resource providers like us or others who can help you, who have seen a lot more of this space and can say, based on what it is that you're telling me you're trying to do, you might look at this or this or this, versus you trying to, I don't know, Google it, figure out the answer using their Google for AI answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think as like a starting place, asking ChatGPT or Claude or something like, what are the top uses of AI in my industry? It may give you some info that you don't already know, but we're actually working with a partner right now to think about. They came to us and they said, hey, can you help us develop a framework for assessing different AI things that we might want to do? And we do a lot of different things, but we don't do exactly that. We do it in different ways. And I was thinking about it today and I was like, what is it that they want from us that's different than just going to any existing framework out there? And we haven't met about it yet, but what I think it is that they want someone who's an expert in each of these tools to help them understand, okay, we're looking at a chatbot for customer service. How do we evaluate the different companies doing this and see, are they technically legit? Is it going to be safe? Is it going to protect my data? Because I think as a business owner, you understand how to evaluate things in terms of like, does this meet my priorities? What's the cost going to be? What's the benefit going to be, et cetera? But getting some expertise in there to just help you assess the more technical side of it, I think is going to be helpful for people.
I think something to consider as a small business owner, and when I think small business, I'm thinking like 20 employees or less. The amount of time and effort that it might take to look into something like that might be more than what you can realistically put in for those solutions. So just be very cognizant of specifically the problems that you want to solve with AI.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think for a 20-person or smaller company,
Yeah.
the story might be different.
But I work with a number of entrepreneurs who are nowhere near 20 employees, and they're looking at it all the time because there's a bunch of stuff, to your point at the very opening of this, that they're not doing at all right now. So it's not a trade-off of I do it myself or the AI does it. It's I don't do it at all or the AI does it. And so I think you're starting to see a lot of that. I mean, and you don't want it to do it. You don't want it to literally have more cost than benefit, but if there's any marginal benefit, the alternative is they're not doing it at all.
I'm thinking of this more from the perspective of working on your business versus working in your business. If you're working on your business, trying to figure out what AI solutions are perfect to the point where you've stopped working in your business and your business isn't moving along anymore.
Yeah.
It's just a pitfall that to be cognizant of.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think one thing, especially for like the very small business owner or anyone for that matter, is spend a little bit of time, like a couple hours, on just figuring out how to effectively prompt these chat tools and like the tools that make images and things. And a lot of them do all of the above, to just figure out what they can be used for and how to be a little bit more effective with them. We teach a class on this. It's a 2-hour class, and we often get like, everyone knows this now, we don't need to do this, but it's our most popular class. It has super high satisfaction. You can figure this stuff out on your own. If you Google around enough, it's not like you have to take a class. But I think just like understanding the art of the possible and understanding how a few simple things that you can put into your prompts can help you, can be really useful. And I think with like things you're not doing, it's very useful. I use it sometimes for creating like images for classes. And are they as good as a graphic designer would do? Like, absolutely not. But would I hire a graphic designer for this? No. It's just like a simple thing.
Right.
Simple thing that I'm doing that we wouldn't have someone do or would do as good of a job on, if I weren't taking the time to quickly do it with an AI tool.
Speaking as a librarian, I think no statement raises my skepticism more than someone saying, "Oh, everyone already knows this."
Yes.
When you say it, no, not everyone knows that.
No, we get that so much. And
Mhm.
we continue to run this class and we keep thinking, oh, everyone knows this now. This has run its course, but it
Yeah.
continues to just get like amazing feedback and people saying like, oh, this is so helpful.
Right.
I know so much more now.
Well, we have a question here, Christopher.
Hi. So I think for maybe for the audience sake, and I'm sort of asking a question I already know the answer to, but maybe can you help clarify kind of the gamut from this is just a very fancy algorithm to the computer is doing a lot of the thought and generation of ideas, the generative AI, because there's a big spectrum in there. And I've read a couple of articles where people are applying to AI, applying AI to things that really are an algorithm or, a calculation, some data analytics kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so the definition of AI is just anytime a computer is doing something that a human could do. So this has been around for a really long time in the form of like simple decision systems. But I think the way that people talk about AI now is usually talking about generative AI, which is the AI that generates something completely new, whether that's text or images or videos. And then in there you have machine learning. So machine learning is sort of a subset of AI. So like I said, AI doesn't actually have to create anything new. AI in its original form could be a system that says, if the color is red, then do this or do this. And these expert systems have been around for a long time. Machine learning is when you take that to the point where the computer's like telling you something that you didn't explicitly tell it. So you're giving it statistical models and, predicting something. And AI, people get into arguments about whether generative AI is still machine learning or not, which I'm not gonna go there. But Gen AI is basically just like it's generating something new. And that's what I think most of the world thinks of as AI right now, because that's what like the big hype is about.
I think to your question, I think you do see a lot of people who view like the Facebook algorithm as AI. And again, if we define it as, that process of a machine doing anything that a human can do, then it certainly is AI, but it is not the way, because we've had algorithms around to sort information and make recommendations for decades. I think that really that the idea that AI is generative AI is because of the absolutely explosive adoption and awareness around as OpenAI launched ChatGPT, right? And it got to 100 million users and however fast that was, I mean, incredibly fast, that people started to say, oh, that's what they mean. And that is just one small branch of the whole experience.
I completely agree with these two answers. The only thing I really would add to it, and I'm not coming from the background of a data scientist, I'm a small business person. But from my understanding of AI is, it's not giving you something new, it's giving you something rehashed that it thinks that you'll like in a nice package. So I would just caution from, anthropomorphizing AI.
Well, I read business news every day, and when you do that, you become a very cynical person. And I'll ask a cynical question. What are some things businesses need to watch out for if they're using AI? What are some ways they could get into trouble? What's a worst case scenario? What's some things that you need to watch out for pitfalls for?
I think it goes back to where we started. I mean, if you're substituting human intelligence, experience, and knowledge with AI around core business functions without any regard for whether or not that's a good and effective substitution, saying, oh, I'm going to fire all my customer service people, but I am ultimately a customer service related business. And I'm going to use AI because it'll save me X dollars, or it'll respond in picoseconds versus, hours or something like that. I mean, that's antithetical to what it is that I think we're all advocating for, and the power of what the system could do. And so it's that substitution of judgment around core business functions that ultimately ends up destroying a lot of value. Like, in higher education, where from a dean's perspective, I'm constantly thinking about, like, how is AI going to change higher ed, right? But from a faculty perspective, they're seeing students substitute their judgment and learning for the machine. Well, that's, as a student, if your job is fundamentally to learn, that's antithetical to the core function of what it is that you're trying to do. And so in those cases, it is literally just destroying value, because it's substituting the computer's judgment for your own. And at that point, we had a retreat earlier today, and this will sound a little pejorative, but they said, that at that point, you, the human, become a big dumb pipe, because you're just typing something into AI when I could have done that as a faculty. Like, the point of education is not to get AI's answer to the essay prompt, right? It is to have you engaged in that. And so, that's an example, but it's one of many examples where you could use it really to do a lot of damage to your business.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's definitely the business sort of danger. I said it already, but thinking about being careful about data, both, your personal information, if you're using it for your own stuff, but also your customers' personal information, and your IP is super important. I think another thing, this is probably more if you're building your own AI stuff, but have accidentally putting out models that have really bad biases in them could get you into reputational or legal trouble. You gave a good example earlier, so I'll let you give that, but.
Yeah, I think just coming from a few different angles, I just warn against anthropomorphizing AI, but for the sake of the answer, AI doesn't know when it's lying to you. It has absolutely no idea if the information it's giving to you is true or not. It doesn't care. Again, it doesn't feel anything, but what it wants is for you to say thank you. It wants you to give an affirmation that it gave a good response, because it's just trying to put together a series of words that you'll take as an output. So it will lie to you. It doesn't know when it's providing false information. And just kind of assuming that anything coming out of that model is going to be good information can get you in the hot seat pretty quickly.
Yeah, I dislike that they've decided if it gives you like a citation for a book that doesn't exist, or an article that doesn't exist, or something that doesn't exist, it's called hallucinating. I think that's anthropomorphic and kind of misleading. It's just being wrong.
Yeah, and it'll also give you sources sometimes that do exist, but that it's not from. So depending on, I think of a good way to explain this, depending on whether the model is querying external sources or not. So if it's not going and searching the web or searching some database, then it's just grabbing its internal information, and the sources that it's giving you are often completely unrelated. I mean, anyone who's asked for references in these chat tools has probably noticed that. Like, it'll give you a reference to the most common book in the field, and I'm thinking, I read that book, I know that book doesn't say that. If it's the type of AI system that does like go elsewhere for knowledge, sometimes it's a little bit better, because it's supplementing its internal knowledge with searching the internet or some database. So then sometimes the sources are a little better, but the research has shown that even in those cases, it's still always sort of biased towards its internal memory. So that's a really active area of research that they're trying to improve upon. But right now, you definitely, as a rule, cannot fully trust the references that it gives you.
One of the most interesting things I think in this space, actually, to your point earlier, is I've read in a variety of spaces that when you say things like please and thank you, when you do that anthropomorphizing and do that, you'll actually get worse responses, because it will drive a sense of that acceptability to the answer faster, and so it will not work as hard as a model. I don't know whether that's technically true, but it's interesting as they think about how, as we have a tendency to say, you know, please do this thing versus just do this thing,
Yeah.
will lead to different qualities of responses, especially over time as you engage with it more on that human side. It'll create a different experience on your AI versus somebody who's just kind of demanding a recall of information or whatever. And I mean, I don't know technically why that would be, but I think it's so interesting that you think about all the things that we would expect and hope for out of a polite society might actually be leading us in the wrong direction on the Gen AI front.
Yeah, well, and this is sort of a tangent, but it made me think of this. Also, just because things are generally going well with a model doesn't mean that an update won't cause a big problem. So I have a friend who's a psychologist and he's trying to figure out how he can, you know, use Gen AI to supplement his practice and these things. And there was just an update a few weeks ago to OpenAI's like ChatGPT, GPT-40 model that made it way too agreeable. And so anything that someone said, it would just say like, oh, you did such a great job. So that, you know, there was an example of someone saying, I quit taking all my, you know, schizophrenia medication and I did this and now, and it's like, that's so great. You did all the best things and they caught it and they fixed it. But I mean, these are the types of things we
Yeah,
have to be
that
aware
way
of.
bias wise, if someone starts typing in their bigoted responses about anything and the thing agrees with you, that can lead to dangerous biases, I would think.
Yeah, exactly. And even if the model wasn't behaving that way before, when they push a new update, they don't always know exactly what's going to happen. So these things can happen.
Although the interesting thing is, so I was at a conference earlier this semester where all we did was basically talk about AI and business education. And it was really a fascinating conference. And they had one of the keynote speakers was a business professor, Wharton, who works with all these CTOs and whatever else. And some of the preliminary data that's really fascinating says that AI is the one model, maybe not 4.0, but one is the best known way of combating conspiracy theories currently, because people will query AI systems in ways that either for whatever reasons they will either not talk to other humans about, or they'll perceive that the responses are biased or whatever else. And so they say, you know, 3 separate interactions with an AI will do more to move attitudes around conspiracy theories than conversations with humans, because we interact with AIs differently. And I guess, so there are these really unique and very much groundbreaking areas of research where we're finding that this tool has this great efficacy over here, and then over here it'll generate an image, which is clearly, you know, ridiculous for something that you're trying to do around your business. So it's just a really, it's just such a dynamic landscape.
Something I wanted to mention about this prompt as well, even when the AI model does work very well, I'm thinking like translation models work pretty well in translating language. Duolingo is currently going through a PR nightmare because they've decided to completely switch over all of their translation services from contractors to AI models, and the user base didn't like that very much. So there are instances, even when the AI model is working correctly, where you can still make a bad business decision with it.
I didn't know about that.
I didn't either. I mean, I didn't hear about that. I would be upset about that too. I also use Duolingo and I have the AI stuff turned on and I don't find it particularly helpful, honestly. So it's not always, it's like it'll tell you, I don't know if anyone else uses Duolingo, but it'll tell you, yeah, it'll tell you like, you know, what a sentence means if you got it wrong, but it doesn't understand the context well enough of
Yeah.
the specific thing that you got wrong. And it could probably be fine-tuned to do that, but in my opinion, in the way that they've implemented it, I don't find it that helpful. So that's, yeah.
Doug, getting back a little bit to building on the idea about getting in trouble. These being, I think the librarians here will agree, what we read about is how large language models train on copyrighted material. And I was wondering if, seems like to my simplistic brain that if you use generative AI or some other, or it's used in some way in a business and you ask it to generate an image, maybe it's drawing from a copyrighted image, or you have to suggest some text that might draw from copyrighted text, and it seems like that could come around and get you if you're not careful. Is that a problem that you see out there, Dan? No, no.
I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest concerns with AI moving forward, at least in the short term. You're even starting to see companies like Getty Images has come out with a Getty, they call it Getty Generative AI, which is an AI platform that will generate images only and solely trained on copywritten work that they have permissions to. So any outcome that you get is going to be perfectly fine from a copyright standpoint.
Oh,
So even the industry already sees things are going to go this direction.
I mean, sort of like a different side of that is that more and more organizations are starting to protect their IP from model training. And more of the content on the internet is being generated by Gen AI. So now it's like Gen AI is just gonna get trained on Gen AI and Gen AI, and it's sort of
Yeah,
like poisoning itself. I mean, I think if anyone's a software developer, you're starting to see there's a thing called Stack Overflow that people would use to ask questions and get answers about how to change different code things.
Yeah.
And a lot of Gen AI stuff is trained on Stack Overflow, but people aren't asking questions on Stack Overflow that much anymore because now they're asking Gen AI. So like the source data that's being trained on is starting to go away. So it will be interesting to see
Hmm.
how
Right.
that sort of thing changes.
The pragmatist in me would say the least of your worries if you're a main company is whether or not somebody's going to sue you or OpenAI, because they've got $100 billion and you do not. So I do think you obviously have real concerns about the degree to which you're capturing information that you have rights to. I wouldn't worry so much about the like monetary consequences of it, so much as like there are obvious ethical concerns,
Yeah.
ethical conundrums that exist in the AI space, and the ethical use of AI is a rapidly emerging field around both research and practice as we start to try and really reckon with what are the actual costs and benefits to humanity around a lot of, both specific and broad questions.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of artists who have started embedding, I'm thinking of digital art where they've started embedding what they call like poison pills into their artwork before they upload it. Specifically, so when it gets decoded by AI, it messes up the image that the AI sees.
Wow.
So I can see, like, even from that perspective, that could even potentially cause litigation in the future.
Did you have your hand up, sir?
Yeah, follow-up question, like what? Oh, sorry. So this is probably a lawyer question. What is the difference between me reading a book, interpreting the information, and then giving you, I'm a consultant and I'm on a particular topic and I read 10 books on this topic. I turn around and I give you advice based on the things I've learned. What is the difference between, and I'm charging you money for that service. What is the difference between that and a computer learning from copyrighted material and giving you an answer that you might be paying for? Like it's an interesting conundrum. Because I come to University of Maine and I spend $50,000 on my education based on a lot of copyrighted material that a lot of really smart people have written. And then I go out and I build a career on that base of knowledge. And there's not a whole lot of difference.
I mean, this is just my quick response to that, but I think you bought that book and you're one person who's gonna go out and share that knowledge, whereas I think with like a large language model, it's taking content that it didn't buy, which I think a lot of people are negotiating buying that material and then spitting it out to the whole world. That's my gut reaction to that.
My reaction is no comment. I'm not a lawyer. Like, it's super, I don't know. I mean, I think that you're going to see a huge and emerging area of law around all of this stuff, because I would say we clearly have no way of really understanding what differentiates that plagiarism from, I mean, it's obvious when it just steals something lock, stock, and barrel and doesn't attribute it to something. At what point it is transformed enough, especially if you say generated by AI, at that point you have cited your source. Like I don't know. That's a very complicated question, I would imagine.
I think the low-hanging fruit answer is obviously the human experience. And I don't necessarily mean just the conversation that we would have in discussions around whatever I'm consulting you on or being consulted on. I would say in 6 months, if I want to come back to you and continue that conversation, we can, where the model may have been updated or that thread's completely gone. And I'm going to get completely different answers from a different perspective from the AI model. It's not really the same as being able to go back to someone that you already see as an expert and you hold in high regard as an expert. And I would also say the barrier to entry is a really big one as well, right? There's a huge difference between one person purchasing a book, really studying a subject or studying the knowledge around an area and being a consultant on that versus even if they did buy the book, right, and uploaded it to the model, they're then possibly sharing with that with millions of people at any time. And there's no really guarantee that the response it's putting together has the same amount of, it's like leveraging the same experience, it's leveraging the same perspective that a human would.
I would say I see though, I mean, just to play devil's advocate, right? I see a lot of medium and large scale consulting firms basically building models and then hiring people to run Excel spreadsheets that are literally completely done and then put into PowerPoint frameworks that are already done. And so you're tweaking some of the language, but you're not hiring expertise there. You're hiring somebody to deploy a system, right? And so, I mean, I don't know how you differentiate any of that stuff. I just know when you look at what you get out of a McKinsey presentation, you get a McKinsey presentation and they're very much formulaic. You're not like that person is not bringing necessarily their idiosyncratic expertise to anything. They're deploying a system. So I don't know the answer to that. And I think that's, every business that they work with that tries to build a clear sense of here are the systems, here's the policies, here's the procedures. We do it this way every time so that it's agnostic to person. You're gonna find some kind of weird intersectionality there. I mean, I don't want to downplay the role of human experience, but we also don't want to run organizations on the basis of everybody's perspective or decision about what we might do with this today versus, 2 years ago.
Other question over here?
Hi. I want to riff a little bit on what you just said because it's got me thinking. You had mentioned that if you buy a book yourself and consume the knowledge and process the knowledge, how is that different than like an AI tool spitting back the information to you? I'd like to encourage us to think that following up on like the human experience element, like what you do with the information is going to be drawn from your perspective and your human experience. So what you do with the information that you read, you're going to apply it in your real world in one way that might be different than what somebody else is going to apply it in their real world. And just kind of to follow up on what Jason was saying, I think the AI tools have like a real good way of helping you like formulate logical consequences and series of events, but the nuance and the human application is the piece that they can't do. And so I guess my question to you guys, I'm thinking more in the education realm, but I guess it fits within the business realm too, because ultimately higher ed is business. In a lot of ways, our students are our customers. How do you see that kind of educational system as a business model changing and how faculty will now have to create application experiences for their students in the world of AI tools? And you may not know the answer. So
Yeah.
put that out there.
I have so many thoughts that will go on forever. I would say, okay. I would say fundamentally, we already know because we have the data and we can just see it from our own lived experiences that students are overwhelmingly biased towards using these tools. Now, in some cases, they literally do what we have said not to do here, and they use the tools, they type in one prompt, it may or may not be good, usually not, they submit the assignment, they don't even read it, right? And they're essentially offloading any agency or any value in participating in the experience. In other cases, they use it to start their thinking or refine their thinking or whatever else it is, in which case it might be a perfectly effective tool for ways to think about it. I think that what we're seeing though or the question I asked my faculty today at this retreat is, to what degree is the role of the faculty member to be the knowledge expert today? Like, are there things that faculty know that the internet does not know? Like, let's move away from it, just AI, but if AI is more or less scraping the internet and the compendium of human knowledge, right? There's a lot that we really have to think about in terms of what is the role of a faculty member and what is the purpose of an education, to think really strategically about how we pull these things together, given if fundamentally universities are student-centric and oriented towards student learning, how do we facilitate that to the greatest degree possible, while recognizing that we have amazing knowledge experts, but nobody at this university or any university knows more than the internet. And so how do we think through how our experiences, the way we create assignments, the way we engage students to participate in learning and take advantage of the compendium of all human knowledge that exists somewhere on the internet? How do we advance that to the purposes of training students that can then go be successful human beings, not just get jobs, although that's obviously important, but to become effective citizens who are aware of things and are able to take the perspective of the other and all the other things that a liberal arts education really advances to their ends. And so I think it's going to just change fundamentally the balance between the conveyance of knowledge and information and the ability to support students in internalizing and then building those experiences that we've talked about that make them distinct from a computer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that any of us have the answer to this. I think we're all scrambling, but I think teaching critical thinking is more important than ever. I think you have to like step your critical thinking up a notch from just when you were searching on the internet, right? Like you need to apply some critical thinking when you're searching on the internet, but at least when you're searching on the internet, it's usually clear what source things came from. Whereas with Gen AI, that's not always true. I think I can be a little old school and say like everybody needs to learn the fundamentals. I still believe that, but I also have to, you know, pair that with the fact that everyone is going to use this stuff, and it is often obvious when people just use it in a way that's not very smart. I mean, I tell them things about programming, like, you know, use it, ask it to explain an example. If it gives it to you, make sure you understand what it's doing, and then half the class, and these are adults. I mean, this was one of these classes was like an adult where everyone in the class had a PhD, and they all gave the same wrong answer. And I was like, guys, use your brain, like think critically, please follow the instructions. So I think that's something I'm always trying to figure out, is how to get them to use it, but use it wisely. And then I think one thing that I think is really interesting, that's not super hard, that you can get these chat tools to do, is different kinds of role play. So like I've personally used it to say, like, I have to have this really difficult conversation with someone about this. Give me a role play conversation where I'm talking to someone and then score me on it and tell it how I could have done better. I've seen professors use this for all different kinds of things with students, with like requirements gathering, where, you know, the person is playing the part of the AI is playing the part of someone in the business. So I think there's a lot of really creative things that faculty are coming up with, but it is a challenge, because I ultimately believe that you still need to know the fundamentals. So I don't know.
But to me, the question is, what is the fundamentals? I mean, we're literally talking about that today, right? To what degree is writing fundamental? And what about writing is fundamental? Nobody had the answer. It's not an easy question to answer, but we talk about like communication skills being distinctly human in some ways,
Yeah.
right? And empathy being distinctly human in some ways. But what's the first principle around that? I don't know that we have done a good job of really interrogating that and then communicating it out. So not just one person has a perspective, but we as institutions have a comprehensive understanding of what about writing is fundamental. Is it
Yeah.
being able to put words on a page? No. Is it About grammar use? Probably not. So what is the thing that is really fundamental about written communication?
I wanted to ask,
Oh,
Dan,
sorry.
I wanted to ask Dan something. Out there and out there being a business mentor to businesses of all kinds, are there, speaking of people misunderstanding what AI can do, are there some common misconceptions you come across of business owners, what they think AI can do, and they have a misconception of what it can do for them?
I think ChatGPT was such a revelation for so many different fields and just kind of generally as a technology
Yeah.
that the average person can look at what ChatGPT does and just see it as like, oh, this can replace people.
Mhm.
This can replace this position. This can replace that position. I don't think it can. It probably never will. It might make that position easier. It might be a good tool to use. But I don't think we're at the point where like even customer service or a chatbot. We use at SCORE, we're testing the idea of using a chatbot for our website as folks come and they'll message the website to get mentoring, business mentoring.
Mhm.
And we have live mentors, volunteers all across the country who are there ready to receive those messages. But sometimes volumes can get pretty high. It could be a several minute wait. So they've kind of experimented with using a chatbot. And I personally don't think that's really the way to go. I think it's much better to just rely on that seat of experience. Because the person on the, like, we've mentioned this quite a few times already, but no one's ever had like an experience with a chatbot and went, oh man, that just made my day, and then hung up the phone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I agree. I think you need it, you want to use it to like augment your experience. And that's why I don't think about writing that much because I'm from the technical side, but that's why I think you need to be able to correct it, right? You need to figure out how to use it to make you faster, which can involve trial and error, right? Sometimes you're using it and you are spending more time like figuring out how to prompt it than it would have taken you to just solve the problem yourself. But I think you need to have people who actually have expertise in whatever area it is, who can ask it the right questions in the right way, which sometimes requires knowledge of the field. I mean, I think I read an article about like if a graphic designer prompts it, then they can say like exactly the right thing that they need it to draw because they have that expertise. Whereas if you don't have that expertise, then you don't. So I think a lot of executives want to think that they can just like fire whole groups of employees because it seems like it performs really well and it is really good at a lot of things. But it kind of reminds me of like if you read news articles in the popular press, if they're not about your profession, then they always seem really good. But sometimes if you read ones about your profession, even in the best newspapers, you go, this person doesn't really understand this, right? Which I think that a lot of the large language models.
I don't think any of the librarians here in the room doesn't have a story about how the media has misrepresented our profession
Exactly.
and what we do all day. Yeah.
But I think that you're not going to see it get rid of like an entire function, but you are going to see it reduce the number of people who are hired in those functions.
Yeah.
We're already seeing that like in investment banking, they're now hiring 10 analysts at a time into a company that might have used to hire 100. Because those 10 people can just be so much more efficient and they were already going to turn over 80% of them anyways, because terrible job in 3 to 5 years, 100 hours a week and just brutal. And so they're hiring 10 instead of 100 and they're providing those people with the tools. So they're not going to get rid of investment banking analysts, but they are just going to hire fewer people and try and drive real efficiencies there.
That's interesting because it's one of my favorite quotes about AI I've read recently might not be true then, because I like the quote where someone said, AI is not going to take your job. Someone who's better at AI than you is going to take your job.
Yeah.
But
that's because those 10 people are better at AI.
well, yeah, those 10 people are better at AI than, yeah, okay. So by the way, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
So I heard you talking a lot about efficiency improvements, cost reductions, your example in finance, Jason.
Yeah.
Have any of you got personal examples of how AI has been used for true innovation rather than efficiency improvements or simply just doing things faster or cheaper?
How would you define true innovation?
Well, I'm curious, in the world of AI, I'm not sure what that means. Perhaps drug development, where you have massive data sets, where you might feed information in to come up with new innovative solutions that have not yet been thought of. in those fields like medicine, X-ray, detection for cancers, etc. I've heard of these kinds of things, but in the smaller businesses, have there been any examples that you're familiar with where it might have been used to generate a new solution, be it a product or service?
I have a small, no, it's not Gen AI, but there's a small example. There's a project that the Roux Institute is doing with Maine Med, where they're looking at all of their heart patient data. So, there's all this medical data out there and not everyone's always looking at it. And so they have all these instruments that people are hooked up to before they get heart surgery. And this is really fairly simple for someone who knows how to do this sort of machine learning project. I can't remember if it was a postdoc or some researchers at the Roux, looked at all this data and basically can predict whether someone's going to have an adverse outcome like after heart surgery ahead of time, which really helps them target the resources to the people who need it the most. So I think there's tons of examples out there like that. That's not generative AI, but that's machine learning. And I think I can't think of all the specific examples, but there's tons of like drug development and a lot of genetics research. They're making a lot of progress with.
I think on the huge data sets, right, there's a lot of examples just because of the sheer volume of data, and people are just, we know they're just terrible once you get to terabytes and petabytes of data. Like, of course, the machine's going to be better at that than any human being's going to be. I think, if you're talking about new product, new market innovation, so like truly de novo innovation in a small or medium enterprise, I'm not aware. I mean, it might have happened once or twice, but I think what you can see generative AI do in those spaces is either identify new products or new markets that don't necessarily have to be truly de novo, that small and medium enterprises can take a look at, because it can allow you to access all of that information in really kind of novel and unique ways. And because it can be done sitting on your couch on a Saturday watching a soccer game or whatever, people are able to do that in ways that are, I'm not going to say passive, but they're kind of more toggling between active and passive in ways that otherwise, like sitting down and really like thinking about innovation is just something that so many small business owners, because they're working in their business so much, I think that becomes a real barrier. So this may make that easier to do. And so in that way it would be, really useful, because you could just query the thing endlessly. Like, hey, how would I refine this? How would I refine this? How would I refine this? And, all you're doing is typing in a prompt and asking that whatever model it is to do the work.
Heather, anything on Zoom? No questions on Zoom. Okay.
I have a good one for this.
Good.
I think a lot of the innovations that we're going to see for small business and AI are going to be kind of similar to what you had mentioned. Or another example is there's a company working on a camera that goes above the trash can in a food business or a restaurant, and it tracks all of the food that's tossed away. So let's say on average, only half of the coleslaw servings that you provide are actually eaten, and most people eat half or less of their coleslaw. It will make the recommendation to serve half as much coleslaw, so you reduce your food waste, which for a small business would be massive.
Huge. Yeah. It's very interesting. For people, actually for students, or let me rephrase, if you're someone just coming in your freshman year at UMaine or at Northeastern, or someone just becoming a business owner and is just hearing about this, or just someone thinking about becoming a business owner, what are some skills? There are specific skills that they could bone up on, or classes they should take to make themselves more skilled at using AI, or preparing themselves for using AI in business when they graduate or when they get to business?
I would say kind of leaning into curiosity, not necessarily a specific skill, but one of the things that I find large language models or generative AI to be incredibly helpful with is to basically act as that sounding board. Obviously, I would recommend a SCORE mentor first, but
Absolutely.
if maybe it's been a while, or you're meeting with your mentors next week and you need an answer right now, it's really good to act as a sounding board to try to get a different perspective on something, especially if you've already been working with it on your idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've said it already, but like the basic prompting, as well as basic analytics, which I know is not Gen AI, but I think just having a decent sense of like basic statistics and basic data visualization. It's not new, it's not sexy, but it's really important. And I think, you know, there's a lot of argument that these Gen AI tools can do this for you, but I think you need to be able to sort of critically think about the output. So I think just, you know, basic understanding of that sort of thing is important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there's a lot of amazing courses out there. Many are free, some that you
Yeah.
could pay for. The people that I know that are at the cutting edge of this are basically, I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, every morning I wake up and I watch 30 minutes of YouTube about AI. And if the video is more than 7 days old, I just skip it and I find the next one.
Yep.
And because it's changing all the time. So the
Yes.
course that you take from literally any educational institution or Coursera or whatever it is, right, is produced, but it's somewhat static as courses have to be in order to build curriculum and move those things
Yeah,
through. And so if you want to be at the cutting edge of something, sit down, watch YouTube videos. There are people that'll post every single day about new things that they're doing, new tools that they're using, new ways that they're using those tools. And it requires some agency, as all learning, I think, does. And so that's an amazing way because it's a real-time update on it. It's not going to have the coherence of a curriculum with learning outcomes.
Yeah.
But if your goal is just to say, I have to bone up on this and build some skills, then you'll build a lot of skills that way. And it fits right back to just being curious and then going out and finding different places where stuff exists for you to view and consume.
Great. Did you have a? Okay, that's right.
So in the library here, we did a AI usage poll, just informal, just to kind of see how people thought about it, how much are actually using AI, et cetera. And I noticed, or two people that actually responded, about like a third of them said they had ethical or philosophical concerns using AI. And so when you go to the business world, it's really a two-part question. The first one is, how do you get people on board with that might have ethical or philosophical concerns? If you're the owner or your department head or whatever it is, without necessarily saying you have to use it. I mean, which you can always do, I guess. And then the second question is, if you're about to, if you own a business and you do have these philosophical concerns, is there anything that you can speak to it? You know, are they valid? Are they changing? You know, about like environmental impact, et cetera. Should they, you know, stick to their guns and absolutely refuse to use it? Should they, you know, like it's inevitable? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but should they just move ahead and use it anyway, et cetera? So anything with that?
I think it probably depends what the ethical concern is, right? I mean, I have ethical concerns from time to time. I mean, I started doing this just because I like math and I like machine learning modeling, and it sort of morphed into what it is today. And I definitely have concerns about, you know, job loss, environmental concerns, all of those things. But I think what I tell myself is that I'm not the one developing the large language model. Like that train has left the station and that's going to keep going whether I'm on it or not. So helping companies in Maine stay up to date so that they can stay in business is what I tell myself, I guess. Yeah, I don't know what to tell people who have ethical.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
I also think that the average person is not going to be a power user that blows through a ton of water trying to use a bunch of ChatGPT models simultaneously. So I think for the average user, the ethical concerns are probably much smaller than they think they might be. And probably on par with just living in a first world country in the first place.
That's a good point.
I think if your goal is to drive adoption, like to the first part of your question, I think if the goal is to drive adoption, we've already heard here the use case, right? I mean, if you're an employee, you can either figure out a way to use it reasonably effectively within your job. If this is a priority and an imperative for your organization, or you can expect that at some point you're going to be passed by, or somebody's going to be hired who's better at it than you are. And I mean, there will just be a point at which you can't be competitive with your peers, given your career aspirations. I think probably all of us are very hopeful that there are not organizations that would just outright fire somebody because they had ethical or philosophical concerns for AI, but eventually, as adoption increases and efficacy increases, right, you'll just be passed by or unable to compete relative to your peers. So I think that the argument is not you have to do this because you have to do it in spite of your ethical or philosophical concerns, so much as to say, these are our priorities as an organization, and we fully expect that being able to use all of the tools that are available to you to do your job really effectively and efficiently will be important as you continue to pursue your career growth. And that won't move everybody, but it'll move most people.
But I think this is a little bit of a tangent. It's less about ethics, but I think driving adoption, especially in like a medium or larger company, you have to include, especially like middle managers, but the people who are going to be involved in this, in the decision-making and the planning process, so that they feel like it's being done with them instead of to them. We've learned that from some of our partners that are really good at this sort of thing. And so, yeah, I think getting people involved in the process really early, and then I think tying it to what the things that the company cares about, is important. This is what we're doing. It's going to help us meet this goal. How can we all do this together? That has worked for us. And I think, luckily our biggest partner has been very clear that they're not going to use this to fire people. So I think that has helped. They've said, we're not going to replace you with this. We're just trying to do better. So
Yeah, it's probably not a bad thing that people are considering ethics around such a broad changing tool that could really change the majority of industries that we have on the planet at the moment. So if anything, I think that's a good thing.
Sounds like it's one more safeguard that a really good union could put up. If you have a unionized workplace, you can say, management cannot fire you based on the recommendations of an AI. Unfortunately, not everyone in this country is unionized. That's something to look into. I've gone back and forth whether or not I even want to bring this up. Is there anything, as you're following how the government's working, the federal or state government, is there anything you think laws or regulations that would help make the adoption of AI go more smoothly and yet more ethically? Or law always plays a catch up to society. I'm not just a business librarian, I'm also a history librarian. And this goes back to Prohibition. During Prohibition, someone at the FBI said, hey, look, if we do this, we can listen in on people's phone conversations, and led to a debate. Well, can we? Well, it's on public lines and we're public defenders. Is yeah, but there's an expectation of privacy between two people on the phone, and they started a whole debate. And they hadn't thought to investigate that until they didn't think to investigate that before phones were invented. But is there anything the government is falling behind on or should be doing? Again, federal or state.
I personally would like to see the government step in and try to protect these smaller artists and creators who are doing the good work of actually creating artwork and creating culture for us that we're then feeding into these machines. I think that's the least we can do for folks who tend to struggle in their industries, especially.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have advice for how to do it, but I know that it is not keeping up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think, as you've already said, John, fundamentally, like this regulation, especially with like technology moving this quickly, it will always lag behind. I can't imagine how you would proactively regulate other than to say, we're just going to shut it off. And we're not going to do it because just like the technology makers themselves are constantly having to adapt their model, and they try and build a really good model using I mean, incredible amounts of data and huge amounts of computing, and they still have to patch it all the time. I don't know how in the legal and regulatory process you would ever write the perfect law that anticipates all the way. I mean, no matter what you do, there will be unintended consequences. So I think the most effective thing that can happen is that we get really effective mechanisms to regulate once it becomes apparent where there are possibilities for some sort of injustice to happen, or to take on these things like copyright concerns and those other things. If we could move more quickly, we could be more responsive, which in a technology environment like this seems more important than trying to preemptively regulate a technology that we don't even know what it can or should do, much less how people might use it.
Yeah, okay, I thought you had a hand up, indicating something going on in Zoom. Have a quiet Zoom tonight. Okay, getting towards the end here. I think I've blown through all of my questions anyway. Any more from here? Anybody from our guests?
My question could send us off the deep end, more general, so.
Well, 15 minutes is enough for the deep end. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the gentleman up front, when he asked the question about whether a human would read 10 books or whatever, and whether, and I think when Jason, you answered it, it was more on the legal end, but I guess my question is, I'm not an education expert, so I don't know whether, to me, if you ask me the question about what's important about writing, it's the fact that you're thinking. And I know it's not a question of whether we use it or not, because we have to use it, and it's helpful in some ways. But I guess I'm thinking, and the question you asked at your retreat is, do we all have to be experts as educators? Maybe we'll use this in a different way, but at some point, shouldn't there be like a common expertise? Like, this thing is not always accurate. Oftentimes it isn't. And I think I heard someone say think at one point. Like, I know that there's like prompts for logical thinking or something, but it's really not thinking. And there's a whole corpus of things that isn't digitized that it's not going to be trained on. So who's going to be there to catch the inaccuracies if everyone just learns how to use it better and use it better in another generation? So it's not an argument for not using it. It's just, I guess it's not about using it or not. It's like how you use it. And since you were saying also that the average person, you think they know something that seems obvious and they don't. And in this profession, at least, we're always talking about critical thinking, and not everybody comes through us with thinking whether they're going to be using it intelligently. I don't know. It's a big question, but I guess, and you can't predict the future, obviously, but that's my concern, that we're not dumbing ourselves down, but like, where's the common expertise going to be? And if it's not in academia, et cetera, I don't know. It just seems like a big problem in future generations.
I mean, I would say to get us started, right? There are all sorts of things that we think we know that we don't know, with or without AI. And you go ask any college student about the things that they think they know about any field, whatever their major is, whether they're a first-year student or a senior or a PhD student, there are things they're confident that they know that they do not know, that they have extrapolated from their experiences or things that somebody told them once. And and so I think we will have to figure out at some point how much baseline knowledge do we need people to develop. I don't think anybody here would advocate for us starting to integrate this into kindergarten education, or like, there are foundational things that we need to probably teach people, but at what point do we start teaching this as a tool to augment, supplement, and hopefully enhance your knowledge? I have no idea, and I do worry deeply about the things that we haven't or we cannot digitize that are not then incorporated. There was this in the world of business, Bloomberg did this amazing study. It was probably 9 months ago now, but they basically ran through, just like a lot of these applicant screening systems have existed for a really long time, that basically sorts job candidates. and they ran candidate resumes through with very, very, 3 or 4 different variations. And they could show that AI, not just an applicant screening system, but the AI was, biased in really profound ways against in particular names that seem to indicate existence in a minority group or whatever else it is, right? And so there are all these pieces that we don't know, and we need to continue to refine, and hopefully the economic imperative of trying to drive $20 a month subscriptions doesn't swamp out the needs to be
Yeah.
better about building AIs and supporting them and enhancing what it is that they're doing to hopefully make them more enlightened than they are now. But I think that it's hard for me to believe that just because AI doesn't always get things right, it would be better to talk to a person, because they don't always get things right either.
Yeah, I think the bias thing is really interesting because AI can be biased, but when you think of like loan underwriting models, like the FICO score was invented to remove the bias of only giving married white men who walked into a bank a loan. And so those models can have biases in them, and you have to be really careful what you include. And if you're doing a good job, you're doing all kinds of bias testing. But it is interesting to think about the human bias. And even on like a resume, I mean, humans are biased towards people's names. They've shown that. So I think the fundamentals question, I think it's a really interesting question. And I mean, we talk about it with computer science a lot, which is not actually my background, but there's all this talk about programming. But my PhD is in mechanical engineering, and I learned a ton of math, even though there were already tools that could do all that math decades before I went to school. So at least when I was in school, they still thought it was important. I think how education is going to change on a macro scale is a whole nother question that has to do with AI and not AI. And I don't know the answer, but.
Did they think it was important, or is that just always the way they've done?
I could argue that it's important. I think understanding how things work at a fundamental level is important. Yeah.
But again, I'm not arguing that we should keep it because we've done it. What I'm saying is that at some point, if the generative AI is not always accurate, and it never will always be accurate, then somebody's got to be there to.
Yeah.
I think that's what really gets me is, like, I think you make a great point that humans can be fallible. Every human is fallible. But, if I'm trying to speak to someone who's an expert on a topic and I feel like they made a mistake or they might be fallible, I can go appeal to another expert or maybe their boss or something. I can't call up OpenAI and, hey, I want to talk to whoever runs ChatGPT. It's never going to happen. And there's no way to make that kind of human connection follow-up in the same way. And that it just realistically as a tool, there probably won't ever be one. I like to think of using AI and how disruptive it can be. But I like to think of AI as, 500 years ago, if you wanted to get into education, you need to know how to make paper, you need to know how to make ink, you need to know how to bind a book. Very similarly, if you're in education now, you're going to need to know how AI works, you're going to need to know how to advise students, you're going to need to know how to teach them how to use it. So I think it's just kind of like a shifting of the tools that we have more so than it is kind of dealing with a separate entity, at least at this moment.
Okay, I think we're gonna try to come in for a landing here. Maybe you want to make any final statement, any final thoughts to sum up, or?
Say thanks for inviting me. This is really,
Yeah, thank you.
I think like the different panelists is one of the more interesting AI conversations I've had lately.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like that's the signal for a round of applause.
There you go.
Okay, well, wrap things up here. Thanks to everyone who attended in person. Thanks to all you on Zoom. And we enjoyed having it. We enjoyed having the discussion. And those of you on Zoom, sorry, but you can't do what the people in person can do, which is start rating the snacks and get some fruit and vegetables and lemon squares to go. Thanks a lot for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
See you later.